Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Fracknoy. I'm the Emeritus Chair of Astronomy at Foothill College, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you watching live tonight or watching the YouTube stream for this lecture in the 25th anniversary season of the Silicon Valley Astronomy Lectures. This is an ongoing program to bring scientists talking about the latest development and the most recent ideas in astronomy to a wide public. We're delighted to be co-sponsored by three organizations: the Foothill College Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Division in Los Altos Hills, the SETI Institute, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, and the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. And we appreciate all their help in getting the word out about the series. If you have questions tonight, the way to ask a question, and you'll see this on the screen as we go along, the way to ask a question is to send an email to astronomy at Foothill, one word, Foothill, at foothill.edu. And Jeff Matthews, the Foothill College astronomy professor, is standing by to receive your questions at that email. All right. Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. David Weintraub is Professor of Astronomy Emeritus at Vanderbilt University, where he founded and directed the Communication of Science and Technology program and conducted research on the formation of stars and planets. He has won the Klopsteg Award from the American Association of Physics Teachers, which recognizes the outstanding communication of contemporary physics to the general public. He is the author of a number of books on astronomical topics, including The Sky is for Everyone, Women Astronomers in Their Own Right, with Virginia Trimble, Life on Mars, What to Know Before We Go, How Old is the Universe, and Is Pluto a Planet? All intriguing titles. He also created a new series called the Who Me series of inspirational and diverse scientific autobiographies for fifth grade level readers. And this is published by World Scientific Publishing. The whole series is designed to help young people see themselves as scientists. So he is a well-known and popular lecturer, an author, and a scientist. And it's a privilege for me to introduce to you now, talking about the impact on religion of the potential discovery of life around other stars, Dr. David Weintraub. You can take it away.
Thank you for being with me for this talk. I'm very happy to be able to make this presentation with you. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is mostly built on material from this book, which Andrew didn't mention yet, Religions and Extraterrestrial Life, How We Will Deal with It, which I published about a decade ago. Because this topic doesn't change very quickly, it's still very much shall we say, up to date. But this is where we're going. I want to mention to you that a lot of my slides have a lot of words. Think of this as closed captioning, because I want you to see a lot of the religious texts that I'm looking at and citing for you. And I think it helps for you to have some words in front of you. But you don't have to read them. You can just listen if you want. So here we go. When I was a youth, astronomers thought they knew the names and identities of every planet that existed in the universe. We knew 9 of them. Somewhere along the way, we lost one of them. I'm not sure I agree with that decision, but that's not a topic for tonight. We can go there another time. But once upon a time, and that time was very recently, astronomers could name 8 or 9 planets in the entire universe. We could speculate about the existence of other planets, but we didn't know of any. That changed in 1995.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you haven't shared your slides with us yet.
Okay,
We need
I
to.
thought it magically happened, so let me try to figure out how to do that. And then we'll start over again. Share. Thank you for letting me know. And are we seeing it now?
We're seeing it perfectly. Go ahead.
All right. So I've told you about this. This is the cover of the book that this material comes from. And I was showing you a picture of the 9 planets that we once knew, which became the 8 planets that we once knew. And we just got to this point where I wanted to tell you about the revolution in astronomy that began just shy of 30 years ago, when 2 astronomers, Michael Mayor and Didier Queloz, discovered this Jupiter mass companion to a solar-type star, a planet the size of Jupiter orbiting a star like the sun. This discovery shocked everybody in astronomy. Nobody thought it was possible to detect planets around other stars. They did this using a technique called the Doppler technique, in which this star that you see and this exoplanet you see are orbiting a common center of mass, which causes this star to come toward the Earth and then alternately away from the Earth. So it's blue shifted and then red shifted over and over and over again. And these are the measurements they made. And you see the negative velocities are the star moving away from us and the positive velocities moving toward us. And if we know I'm sorry, that should be the other way around, I think. But if we know the velocities and we know the size of the orbit, we can calculate the mass of the planet. And that's how they knew that 51 Pegasus had a planet about the size of Jupiter orbiting in an astounding 4 days. That broke open the dam. The radial velocity method was then used to discover quite a few planets. There's a second method that's been used to discover planets. That's the transit method, in which a planet passes in front of a star during its orbit and blocks out a tiny little bit of light from the star. This is illustrated here with a composite image of Venus passing in front of the sun. This occurred in 2012. It's not going to occur for another 100 years, so don't hold your breath waiting for it. But there's a number on the screen for you. When Venus passes in front of the sun, 1/10 of 1% of the light of the sun is blocked. That's a ridiculously small amount of light. And to detect that drop in brightness of a planet around another star seemed preposterous that astronomers could do it. Now they do it all the time. This is an illustration of one of those eclipse events. This is for the star BJD plus 24 and some other numbers. And you see the brightness of the star in the top plot, and then boom, the bottom drops out, except the bottom doesn't really drop out. It drops out by about 0.8 of 1%. And that drop is illustrated in the bottom plot here. And from the length of time of the drop, the eclipse or the occultation, and the amount of the drop, we can calculate the size of the planet, but not the mass of the planet. Those 2 techniques have been used to discover a lot of planets, and you'll see where this is going in a moment. As of today, I checked this morning, there are 7,337 confirmed exoplanets, planets orbiting other stars. There are an additional almost 10,000 exoplanet candidates identified by NASA and ESA that astronomers are studying to see if they're really planets. In June of 2019, there were about 4,000 known planets. 3 years later, in the summer of 2022, that number had increased by 1,000. Only 1 year later, that number had increased by another 1,000. And now a year later, we're up by another 1,000. The number of known planets is increasing very rapidly. The Kepler satellite, NASA's Kepler satellite, has discovered 2,773 of these planets and another 548 exoplanets discovered with the follow-up mission called K2. The TESS mission, launched by NASA a few years ago, has discovered 557 confirmed exoplanets with almost 5,000 candidate exoplanets that they're currently studying. The Gaia mission, launched by the European Space Agency about 11 years ago, has so far discovered 72 exoplanets. But the expectation is with their next data release in 2026, they will report thousands, maybe tens of thousands of additional exoplanets. There's a project called HATNet, which consists of 6 automated little telescopes around the globe. They've discovered 134 exoplanets. SuperWASP, another telescope project with one telescope in the northern hemisphere and one in the south, reports discovering 192 exoplanets. The Kelt telescope, which was operated for about 15 years by people at my own university, reported discovering 20 exoplanets with a telescope with an aperture of 1.65 inches. The HARPS instrument used by ESO in the southern hemisphere at La Silla Observatory reports 130 known exoplanets. The TRAPPIST project in Belgium has reported 7 exoplanets. And an amateur astronomer, a Nashville lawyer in my hometown, with his own telescope, has discovered half a dozen new planets. It would seem like just about everybody is searching for and discovering exoplanets. In addition, we can take a look at the number of exoplanets that have been discovered, and this is what takes me in the direction I'd like to take you. When I first started looking at this idea about 15 years ago, I realized that the number of exoplanets known to us was increasing dramatically, and I coined a version of Moore's Law, which should be known to most people in Silicon Valley. The number of known exoplanets triples every 5 years. So if you look at the chart I've got on the right side of this panel, you've got numbers to try to justify that. In 1990, we knew 0 planets around other stars. In 1995, the first one was discovered. By 2000, we knew of 50, and 5 years later, in 2005, 150. It tripled. In 5 years later, in 2010, it almost tripled at 400. By 2015, the number was above 1,200. It tripled again. By 2020, 5 years later, we were at 4,000. It tripled again. Today, we're at 7,339. Will we reach 11,000 or 12,000 and triple by 2025? I think we probably will. A lot of those candidate exoplanets will be reported as genuine confirmed exoplanets. Will we reach 33,000 of them by 2030 with the work being done by the Gaia team? Probably. Will it triple again by 2035? We don't even know what telescopes will be used for these searches by then. I think the answer is yes. By 2040, 300,000 exoplanets. By 2045, 1 million exoplanets. And even if the rate of discovery slows down, I feel extremely confident that by the end of this century and the lifetimes of many of the folks who are watching tonight, we will know of the names and addresses, if you will, of more than 1 million planets around other stars. And what are we going to do with that? We're going to study those planets. And why are we going to study those planets? Why are we so interested? This is why. Astronomers think that life in the universe, if there is life in the universe beyond the Earth, most likely will exist on the surfaces or in the atmospheres of planets orbiting stars. So the discovery of planets orbiting other stars leads us very directly to searching for signs of extraterrestrial life. And we're doing that. Okay. Let's ask a question. Could intelligent beings somewhere else in our galaxy detect us using the technologies we have today? Could they point our telescopes back at us and prove that we exist? And the answer is yes. Could we point our telescopes at another planet somewhere in the Milky Way and prove that there's life on those planets? And the answer is yes, we could do that. We're actively working toward that goal. NASA launched the CHEOPS mission a few years ago, which is supposed to characterize the masses and densities of these exoplanets, not discover more, but to characterize the planets. The Plato mission, launched again planned for a launch by ESA in 2 years, is also supposed to characterize the exoplanets, measuring their sizes, finding their moons. ESA plans a mission called Ariel for a launch in 2029. which will analyze the atmospheres of exoplanets. NASA launched the JWST 3 years ago at a cost of $10 billion. And a third of the observing time is being used to study exoplanets. This is big business in the astronomy community to study and find the exoplanets. And this is one of the results reported by JWST, a study of the exoplanet WASP 96b, in which you see in the spectrum of the planet the signature of water. There's water in the atmosphere of this exoplanet, which means it's a habitable planet. Life could exist on this planet. That doesn't say life does exist, but it could exist. NASA put together an early concept for a mission that is hoped to be launched in 2045, very forward-looking, at a cost of $11 billion. And the goal of this mission, HabX, is to study habitable planets, to try to seek signs of water and other biosignature gases, including oxygen and ozone. We are searching for life. We are actively searching for life on these thousands and soon to be millions of known exoplanets. About 40 years ago, Carl Sagan wrote in his book, The Cosmic Connection, the idea of extraterrestrial life is an idea whose time has come. I think Sagan was ahead of his time. I think until just a few years ago, the only way we could reasonably talk about extraterrestrial life was to sit around a campfire, open a bottle of wine, and start talking about what we think, not what we know, but what we think might be true. As we live and speak, astronomers are changing this question, is there life in the universe, into a truly scientific question, which we may answer. It's no longer an existential question, it's a scientific question. Buckminster Fuller, a futurist and the inventor of the geodesic dome, wrote, sometimes I think we're alone. Sometimes I think we're not. In either case, the thought is staggering. And Arthur C. Clarke wrote, two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. We are on the cusp of finding out whether we are alone. And the thought is staggering and terrifying. And I realized that with the rapid discovery of other planets, we should be thinking about what it might mean to discover life in the universe. What will we think when we've discovered life in the universe? So this is the big question. How will the discovery of extraterrestrial life impact us? And I took it in a particular direction. So this is my rabbit hole. And the rabbit hole is one of religion. Is my God the God of the entire universe? If there are living beings elsewhere in the universe, do they worship the same God? Must they worship the same God? A second question, does my religion make sense only for humans on Earth, or could it be valid for humans throughout the universe? If I could travel somewhere else in the universe, would my religion still make sense? And my third question, could an extraterrestrial practice my religion on a planet orbiting a star on the other side of the galaxy or the other side of the universe? Would my religion make sense for extraterrestrials? Those are questions that start us, and I decided I wanted to try to understand what scholars, religious scholars, would have to say and what different religions might have to say in answer to these questions. And that led me to put together this book in which I have chapters on a number of different religions, which are identified here on the page for you. We're not going to talk about all of these today, but I'm going to introduce you to some of the thoughts that come from some of these religions. Now, the way I did this was I didn't want this to be about me speculating. I wanted to look into the sacred writings of these different religions and find out what scholars and expositors who live within those religions had to say about their own sacred writings. To get started, I want to take you back in history to where these ideas, I think, began with Epicurus almost 2,500 years ago. Epicurus wrote, "There are infinite worlds, both like and unlike this world of ours. We must believe that in all worlds there are living creatures and plants and other things we see in this world. We must believe this," he wrote. This became the idea that we call the plurality of worlds, that other worlds are inhabited. And from the time of Epicurus, this idea took root that if there are other worlds, they must be inhabited. About 1800 years later, the German Cardinal Nicolaus Cusanus wrote, "It may be conjectured that in the area of the sun, there exist solar beings, bright and enlightened denizens, and by nature much more spiritual than as may inhabit the moon, who are possibly lunatics, whilst those on earth are more gross and material." One thing to note with both this quote and the previous one is they based their knowledge on exactly nothing. Okay. The same thing is true for Kepler. Johannes Kepler wrote in 1610, a year after Galileo discovered the moons of Jupiter, "It is not improbable, I must point out, that there are inhabitants, not only on the moon, but on Jupiter too. Each planet in turn, served with its occupants, is served by its own satellites. From this line of reasoning, we deduce with the highest degree of probability that Jupiter is inhabited." Again, knowledge based on absolutely nothing. But this was what everyone believed. Until the end of the 18th century, when problems emerged. And this is really where our story for today emerges. David Rittenhouse, the first important American astronomer, wrote in 1775, "The doctrine of a plurality of worlds is inseparable from the principles of astronomy." Virtually every astronomer believed that. But this doctrine is still thought by some pious persons, and by many more, I fear, who do not deserve that title, to militate against the truths asserted by the Christian religion. The plurality of worlds doctrine and Christianity seem to contradict each other, according to David Rittenhouse. This is the first time someone publicly enunciated this idea. It didn't go anywhere for about 20 years. And then Thomas Paine emerged. Thomas Paine was a famous pamphleteer at the time of the American Revolution, one of our founding fathers, and he threw down the gauntlet. He wrote this book, The Age of Reason. And in The Age of Reason, he said this: "From whence then could arise the solitary and strange conceit that the Almighty, who had millions of worlds equally dependent on his protection, should quit the care of all the rest and come to die in our world because, they say, one man and one woman had eaten an apple?" He continues, "And on the other hand, are we to suppose that every world in the boundless creation had an Eve, an apple, a serpent, and a redeemer? In this case, the person who is irreverently called the Son of God, and sometimes God himself, would have nothing to do than to travel from world to world in an endless succession of death, with scarcely a momentary interval of life." Though it is not a direct article of the Christian system that the world that we inhabit is the whole of the inhabitable creation, yet it is so worked up therewith from what is called the Mosaic account of the creation, that to believe otherwise, that is, to believe that God created a plurality of worlds, at least as numerous as what we call stars, renders the Christian system of faith at once little and ridiculous, and scatters it in the mind like feathers in the air. The two beliefs cannot be held together in the same mind, and he who thinks that he believes in both has thought but little of either. That was Thomas Paine. He knew how to write a pamphlet to get people's attention. I call this the Thomas Paine problem. Can Christianity exist together with the idea of a plurality of worlds? And in the 19th century, Christian scholars wrestled with this and struggled, and they are still struggling. So let me take you to where this argument goes. In the early part of the 19th century, a new religion emerged, Seventh-day Adventism. It was founded by Ellen G. White and James White, and they proclaimed that Ellen White was a prophet. What does that mean? Well, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has 28 fundamental beliefs, and the belief number 18 is called the gift of prophecy. This gift is an identifying mark of the remnant church and was manifested in the ministry of Ellen G. White. As the Lord's messenger, her writings are a continuing and authoritative source of the truth, which provide for the church comfort, guidance, instruction, and correction. In 1995, the Seventh-day Adventist Church released the Statement of Confidence in the Spirit of Prophecy, writing, "We believe she did the work of a prophet. As Seventh-day Adventists, we believe that her writings carry divine authority." So what did Ellen G. White have to tell us? In a pamphlet that James White wrote, published in the 1840s, called A Word to the Little Flock, he wrote, "Ellen had a vision of the handiworks of God. She was guided to the planets Jupiter, Saturn, and I think one more. After she came out of her vision, she could give a clear description of their moons." Remember, she's a prophet. She's relating ideas she gets directly from God. Another witness wrote about her vision. Mrs. Truesdale wrote, "The Spirit of God rested upon us. We soon noticed that she was insensible to earthly things. This was her first view of the planetary world. After counting aloud the moons of Jupiter, and soon after those of Saturn, she gave a beautiful description of the rings of the latter. She then said, 'The inhabitants are a tall, majestic people, so unlike the inhabitants of earth. Sin has never entered here. Sin has never entered here.'" In her own writing in 1882, in a section called God's Love for His People, Ellen G. White wrote, "The Lord has given me a view of other worlds. The inhabitants of the place were of all sizes. They were noble, majestic, and lovely. I asked one of them why they were so much more lovely than those on the earth. The reply was, 'We have lived in strict obedience to the commandments of God and have not fallen in disobedience like those on earth.' No original sin on these other worlds." Ellen G. White and the Seventh-day Adventist Church had wrestled with and solved the Thomas Paine problem. And their solution was the one presented by Ellen White. Humans are the only sinful, depraved beings in a universe that's full of intelligent, God-worshiping beings. This is a very low view of humanity. Maybe we deserve it. But this is one intellectually rigorous solution to the Thomas Paine problem. Christianity still works, but Christianity, in the Seventh-day Adventist view, is only for earthlings because nobody else needs it. Nobody else needs redemption because nobody else suffered original sin. In the same time period, Joseph Smith wrote his Book of Mormon in 1830 and then organized the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I've selected a number of quotes from Mormon scriptural texts, the two of them, Book of Moses and Doctrine and Covenants. So let me read a few of these for you, because they're going to also find a way to solve the Thomas Paine problem. From Moses 1:29. "And he beheld many lands, and each land was called earth, and there were inhabitants on the face thereof." And so this suggests there are many, many earths, okay, and they're all inhabited. Moses 1:33, we see, "And worlds without number have I created." So many worlds God has created that they can't even be counted, and they're all inhabited. 2 verses later, "But only on an account of this earth and the inhabitants thereof give I unto you. For behold, there are many worlds that have passed away by word of my power, and there are many that now stand, and innumerable are they unto man. But all things are numbered unto me, for they are mine, and I know them." So there are innumerable inhabited worlds in the universe, according to the beliefs of Mormonism, and they all worship, all those beings on those many worlds worship the same God. From the Doctrine and Covenants, 76:24, the words are these: "That by him and through him and of him the worlds are and were created, and the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God." again from the book of Moses. Behold, I am God, wherefore I can stretch forth mine hands and hold all the creations which I have made, and mine eye can pierce them also. And among all the workmanship of mine hands, there has not been so great wickedness as among thy brethren. And so the Thomas Paine problem is solved again in a similar way. But for the Mormons, the humans are not the only sinful creatures in the world, but we are the most wicked, the most sinful, the most depraved beings in an entire universe that's full of intelligent, God-worshiping beings. It's not a very high view of mankind, but it solves the Thomas Paine problem within the religious structure of Christianity. Let's take a look at modern Roman Catholicism. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who lived in the early part of the 20th century, was a Jesuit priest who was the first Roman Catholic scholar to think hard about this question. He wrote, "If there is an original sin in the world, it can only be and have been everywhere in it and always, from the earliest of the nebulae to be formed as far as the most distant." He's suggesting that this thing we call original sin that occurred in the Garden of Eden on earth is a universal event or problem. Original sin exists everywhere in the universe. From the very beginning, from the earliest of the nebulae to the most distant, original sin permeates the entire universe. The spirit of the Bible and the church is perfectly clear. The whole world, and by world he means universe, the whole world has been corrupted by the fall, and the whole of everything has been redeemed. So the basic framework of Christianity applies, in his view, to the entire universe. The entire universe has been corrupted by original sin. And everyone everywhere in the universe has been redeemed or has the potential for redemption. But, he writes, we can no longer derive the whole of evil from one single hominian. Neither one man nor the whole of mankind can be responsible for contaminating the whole. Adam eating the apple in the Garden of Eden did not send original sin faster than the speed of light through the whole universe and backwards and forwards in time. That's something that only brought original sin to earth. The idea of an earth chosen arbitrarily from countless others as the focus of redemption is one that I cannot accept. On the other hand, the hypothesis of a special revelation in some millions of centuries to come, teaching the inhabitants of Andromeda that the Word was incarnate on earth, is just ridiculous. And so for him, Christianity on earth is not going to be sent out to other worlds. We are not going to proselytize the inhabitants of Andromeda and tell them about what happened on Earth. That makes no sense. Karl Rahner, a Jesuit priest and theologian from the middle of the 20th century, wrote, "If we imagine the cosmos as a world coming to be, then it is really not to be taken for granted that this aim has been successful only at the tiny point in the cosmos we know of as our Earth. So life exists beyond the Earth." A theologian can hardly say more about this issue than to indicate that Christian revelation has as its goal the salvation of the human race. And so he's going to say nothing about the rest of the universe, but he is going to claim that Christianity is just about us. It's an earthly religion, a terrestrial religion, not a universal religion. Brother Guy Consolmano is now the director of the Vatican Observatory. He wrote a book a few years ago called "Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial?" And he had a lot to say on the subject. He wrote, "It is not just humankind, but the whole of creation that was transformed and elevated by the existence of Christ." So we have scholars within the Roman Catholic Church taking the exact opposite view even today. And according to Guy Consolmano, Christianity applies to the entire universe, not just for humankind, but for the whole of creation. The existence of Christ on earth transformed and elevated all beings everywhere in the universe. But there's one crucial question that will face Christianity if or when extraterrestrial intelligence is discovered. Would aliens need to have their own version of Jesus? Do aliens need to be saved? Here's the original sin thing again. Depends if they are subject to original sin or not. The traditional theology of original sin, tracing it back to the origins of the human race, says absolutely nothing about other entities either way. Once we find other intelligences, we'll be in a better position to expand that theology. So this is a slightly different approach from what he first said, which is if they suffer original sin, maybe they'll have their own Jesus instead of learning about our Jesus. He continues, though. St. Paul's hymns in Colossians 1 and Ephesians 1 make it clear that the resurrection of Christ, which happened on earth, applies to all creation, everything in the heavens and everything on earth. It is the definitive salvation event for the cosmos. Just how this word might be spoken to the rest of the intelligent universe, I don't know, but it will be in words, that is, events, appropriate to those beings. And so the resurrection of Christ on earth will somehow be communicated to Andromeda. Paul Tillich, let's move to mainline Protestantism now. Paul Tillich, a Lutheran minister, one of the most influential theologians of the last century, said this: a question arises which has been carefully avoided by many traditional theologians, even though it is consciously or unconsciously alive for most contemporary people. It is the problem of how to understand the meaning of the symbol Christ in the light of the immensity of the universe, the heliocentric system of planets, the infinitely small part of the universe which man and his history constitute, and the possibility of other worlds in which divine self-manifestations may appear and be received. If there are non-human worlds, such worlds cannot be without the operation of saving power within them. In other words, original sin exists there. They need to be saved. The manifestation of saving power in one place implies that saving power is operating in all places. Man cannot claim to occupy the only possible place for incarnation. In the appearance of Christ, he actualizes this love for historical man alone. And so Christianity is for earthlings. But in this view, Christ will move around the universe to be incarnated on every world where redemption is needed. Louis Ford, a process theologian from Old Dominion University, wrote, are we then to conclude that God's only Son became uniquely incarnate once and for all on the third planet of a rather ordinary star of a thoroughly undistinguished galaxy? God's dynamic word knows no single form. The Logos then refers to the totality of God's creative aims. We may distinguish this from the Christ, which signifies one specific divine creative purpose addressed to the human situation. The word appropriate to our condition becomes incarnate by becoming fully actualized in the words, deeds, and suffering of Jesus. So again, Christianity is for us. Ian Barber, another process theologian and a physicist, wrote that the Word of God will also have revealed itself as the power of redemption at other points in space and time, in ways appropriate to the forms of life existing there. And so again, original sin is everywhere. The God of Christianity will reveal itself throughout the universe in a different way. Christianity is for earth, but the God of Christianity is universal. Wolfgang Pannenberg wrote, God's action then is seen to be a single act that embraces the whole cosmic process, and that thus leaves room for a plurality of creatures. The as yet problematic and vague possibility of their existence in no way affects the credibility of Christian teaching. The turning of the Father to each of his creatures is always mediated through the Son. And so Christianity works on earth, and the Son of God will somehow appear and provide redemption on every other inhabited world in the universe. Within Protestant theology, we've got both views, every possible view of how this will work. One more view of Protestantism is the creationist view. And here I take the words of a writer, Jonathan Sarfati, who writes a lot in creation magazines and journals. Scripture strongly implies that no intelligent life exists elsewhere, and the long-running search for extraterrestrial intelligence or SETI projects have failed to refute this. Earth was created to be home for creatures made in God, the Creator's image. It was on Earth that the first human couple rebelled against its Creator and brought the cosmos under his curse. Original sin occurred on Earth. Thus, it would have affected Martians, Vulcans, Klingons, and any other beings in the universe. The second person of the Holy Trinity incarnated on Earth alone, took on human nature, died for the sins of those with whom he has the kinsman-redeemer relationship, then ascended to the right hand of God the Father. He did not take on Vulcan or Klingon nature, and he will have only one bride, the church, for all eternity. It would therefore seem hard to reconcile intelligent life on other worlds with the doctrine of the incarnation. It would also seem odd for God to create microscopic life on other planets, but we should not be dogmatic on this. And so the dominant creationist view is that there is no other life in the universe, and there can be no life elsewhere in the universe. God's sole attention is on humans here on Earth. Let me take you to Islam. Islam emerged in 610 when the archangel of Revelation, Gabriel, revealed the word of God to the prophet Muhammad. The Quran is the holy text in Islam. These are words revealed to Muhammad and then written down by his followers. Ibrahim Khalil, Islamic philosopher at George Washington University, has written, the most common attitude towards science in the Islamic world is to see it as an objective study of the world of nature, namely as a way of deciphering the signs of God in the cosmic book of the universe. Natural sciences discover the divine codes built into the universe, into the cosmos by its creator, and in doing so, help the believer marvel at the wonders of God's creation. Another Islamic scholar, also at George Washington University, Sayyid Hossein Nasr, has written, all beings in the universe are Muslim, surrendered to the divine will. So the Islamic belief is that there are intelligent beings elsewhere in the universe, and they are all Muslim. There's a single God. The quotes that support that I'll show you in a moment, but I want you to think a moment. The Islamic faith includes a number of pillars of the faith. One of those is praying while facing Mecca. One is undertaking a pilgrimage to Mecca. These would be astoundingly difficult to do if you lived on a planet orbiting a star every 4 hours, 500 million light years from Earth. So how do we reconcile this with the belief in Islamic faith of extraterrestrial life? Here are some verses from the Quran. His are all things in the heavens and on the earth. His throne doth extend over the heavens and the earth. So any beings anywhere in the heavens will worship the God of Islam, Allah. Whatever beings there are in the heavens and the earth do prostrate themselves to Allah. Allah is the creator of all things. He is the one, the supreme and irresistible. Allah is the God of the entire universe, according to the Quran. Not one of the beings in the heavens and the earth but must come to Allah, most gracious as a servant. He does take an account of them all and hath numbered them all exactly, and every one of them will come to him singly on the day of judgment. To him belong all creatures in the heavens and on earth. And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the living creatures that he has scattered through them. And he has the power to gather them together when he wills. And so every created being in the universe worships Allah. And there are created beings throughout the universe, according to the Quran. You can draw two conclusions from this. One is that from the perspective of a Muslim on earth, Allah, the God of Islam, is the God of the entire universe. But Islam, which is the religion practiced by Muslims on earth, is for us alone. It's a terrestrial religion. Those who might worship the same God elsewhere in the universe will have their own prophet, and their own prophet would reveal to those other beings pillars of the faith that are appropriate for those beings on their world. In other words, they will have their own Muhammad. Muhammad will not go to different worlds, but they will have their own prophet who will bring to them a religion that will be a Muslim religion. But Islam is the religion for Muslims only for earth. Let me take you to Judaism. There's a silly little saying, but let me take you here. During a lecture by a rabbi, an unstable acting man in the crowd continually got up to interrupt the rabbi and kept insisting that the rabbi must agree with him that extraterrestrial life exists. The rabbi finally replied to the Meshuggah, "Okay, fine, extraterrestrial beings exist, but what does that have to do with the fact that you're not learning any Torah?" To sum it up, in Judaism, it doesn't matter if extraterrestrial life exists. That's none of our business. Now, Rabbi Hashday Kreskes, an influential medieval Jewish philosopher, wrote a book called Light of the Lord. It was one of the first Talmudic commentaries on extraterrestrial life, probably the first one. And he wrote that space is infinite, and infinite space contains a potentially infinite number of worlds. And in that universe, there's nothing in physics and nothing in the scriptural or Talmudic writings that can deny the existence of extraterrestrial life. So they probably exist. And then he asks, what does God do at night? He rides a light cherub and floats in 18,000 worlds. A little bit later, a couple centuries later, Rabbi Horowitz of Vilna took up this idea of the 18,000 worlds and suggested that intelligent life exists on those worlds, though those life forms might not be similar to life on Earth. And then he asked, why would God ride a chariot through those 18,000 worlds? And his answer is because those 18,000 worlds are inhabited by his creations, and he chooses to periodically visit them. In more modern times, Aryeh Kaplan, an Orthodox rabbi from the middle of the 20th century, wrote, the basic premise that of all possible species, only man has free will is well supported by the great Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe Cordovero in his Pardes Ramonim. Using tight logical arguments, he demonstrates that there can be only one set of spiritual worlds. Although God would want to maximize the number of recipients of his good, his very unity precludes the existence of more than one such set. Since this set of worlds deals specifically with God's providence toward man because of his free will, this also precludes the existence of another species sharing this quality. And so we have within Judaism opposite answers to the question, is there extraterrestrial life? Rabbi Norman Lamb, who is the head of the rabbinic school at Yeshiva University in New York for more than 30 years, wrote a book in 1986 called The Religious Implications of Extraterrestrial Life. He wrote, no religious position is loyally well served by refusing to consider annoying theories which may well turn out to be facts. They, meaning evidence for extraterrestrial life, they may be, and Judaism will then have to confront them. So he doesn't conclude that extraterrestrials exist or don't exist, but he's very open to the idea, but we don't need to worry about it until the time comes when we know about them. William Klass was a science fiction writer, and he wrote a book or a short story on the Venusian Jewish community hosting an interstellar neo-Zionist conference. And I want to read a summary of this to you. The Venusian Jewish community has the privilege of hosting the first interstellar neo-Zionist conference. The Venusian family of Milchik, the TV repairman, has the honor of hosting 3 conference delegates from the 4th planet of the star Rigel. A problem emerges when these delegates from Rigel 4, the Bulbas, turn out not to look much like Milchik or any other Jews at the conference. Instead, they look like brown, wrinkled pillows with gray spots and short tentacles. The conference starts badly. In fact, the conference cannot start because the Committee on Accreditation refuses to seat the Bulbas. Even though the bulbas have appropriate credentials, the Committee on Accreditation concludes that they cannot be Jewish because they do not look Jewish. In particular, they're not human. The conference is in chaos, unable to seat the bulbas, but also unable to open because of the credentialing dispute. And so Rabbi Smallman from Venus is appointed to the High Rabbinical Court that will decide what should be done. The rabbis think deeply. What would happen, they ask, if humans go deep into space, perhaps to another galaxy even, and we find all kinds of strange creatures who want to become Jews? Suppose we find a thinking entity whose body is nothing but waves of energy. Do we say, no, you're not entirely acceptable? Finally, thanks to the wise counsel of Rabbi Smallman, the High Rabbinical Court makes a decision. There are Jews and there are Jews. The bulbas belong in the second group. Extraterrestrial life just doesn't matter to Judaism. Let's talk briefly about Hinduism and Buddhism before we wrap up. Within Hinduism, there are no firm ideas about extraterrestrial life, but there are firm ideas that help us understand how Hinduism views extraterrestrial life. Reincarnation, essential to Hinduism. Samsara is what's called the endless cycle of birth and rebirth within and between levels of life. And reincarnation, the rebirth of a soul, could happen to someone anywhere in the universe. There are no known laws of physics that would apply to a reincarnation event. And so a living being on Earth after death, when that soul is reincarnated, it could be reincarnated as a living being anywhere in the universe. That doesn't mean there is life elsewhere in the universe, but there certainly could be, and there's nothing within Hinduism that precludes that. Within Buddhism, there is an idea of the thousandfold world universe. As far as these suns and moons revolve, shedding their light in space, so far extends the thousandfold world universe. In it, there are thousands of suns, thousands of moons, thousands of inhabited worlds of varying sorts, thousands of heavenly worlds of varying grades. This is the thousandfold minor world system. Thousands of times the size of the thousandfold minor world system is the twice a thousand middling world system. Thousands of times the size of the middling world system is the thrice a thousand great cosmos. So how does our universe, the one known to astronomers, relate to this thousandfold world universe? The Buddhist answer was that the known universe, as understood by modern astronomers, this universe, which is several billion, tens of billions of light years in extent, is but a drop of water in the ocean. That's the Buddhist vision of this thrice a thousand great cosmos. And Buddhist cosmologies imply that every world system would be inhabited. They don't tell us how Buddhism would apply to these other inhabited worlds, except they're all part of the thrice a thousand great cosmos that's part of Buddhism, so one would expect that Buddhist beliefs would work there, all those theirs as well. So here's a summary for you of what we've talked about. Our question is, how will we handle the discovery that extraterrestrial life either exists or does not exist? Now, we may well discover that extraterrestrial life exists, though we might not prove that intelligent beings exist. But if microscopic extraterrestrials exist and evolution exists as a process, then almost certainly intelligent beings would also exist somewhere in the universe. Could we ever prove that life does not exist in the universe? No, science can't prove a negative. We could study thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of other planets and not find a sign of life. That would strongly suggest that life or intelligent life doesn't exist in our part of the universe, maybe not in our galaxy, maybe not in the local part of the universe, but we could never actually prove that life doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. But if the laws of physics are the same in our part of the universe as they are in other parts of the universe, and we discover the absence of life in a huge part of our part of the universe, that strongly suggests that we may be alone in the universe. For Roman Catholicism, if life exists, they have major theological problems to solve, and they have not solved them yet. If life doesn't exist, they don't have a problem. For mainstream Protestantism, if life exists beyond the earth, that's not a problem. And if it doesn't exist, that's not a problem. Within evangelical Protestantism, and certainly within creationism, if life exists beyond the earth, that's a really big problem. If life doesn't exist, that's exactly what they expect. For Mormonism, there are no problems with life beyond the earth because that's expected. But Mormonism is a very earth-centric religion. If life does not exist in the universe, that creates serious problems for Mormonism because Mormon sacred texts say those beings do exist. Within Judaism, it doesn't matter whether life exists or doesn't exist. Within the Baha'i faith, which we didn't talk about tonight, no problems either way. Within Jainism, which we didn't talk about tonight, there are no problems either way. But if life does exist, Jainism has a bit of a problem because it's a very earth-centric faith. Within Islam, if life exists elsewhere, no problem because Islam predicts that. If life doesn't exist, Muslims would be very surprised. Within Buddhism and Hinduism, if life exists elsewhere, there'd be no surprises. But if we could somehow prove that life doesn't exist or is so rare that we can't find it, I think Buddhists and Hindus would be very disappointed. So I'll leave this slide here for a moment for you to try to understand and think about. I find it amusing. I've enjoyed talking with you about the idea about whether life exists elsewhere in the universe and what that means for us along a particular line of thinking, and that is religion, terrestrial religion. If and when we discover that life exists beyond the earth, many, many religions have ideas which need to be reconciled with that discovery. What actually surprised me in doing this research was to find how many religions would not be bothered by the existence of extraterrestrial life. But there are problems for many religions with the existence of extraterrestrial life in figuring out how any particular religion fits in to the greater cosmos. I will stop sharing my screen here and take it back to the team at Silicon Valley.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that very wide-ranging introduction to some of the religious thinking. It's fascinating to see the text going so far back. And in a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff Matthews, who's been curating the questions. But before I do, I have to exercise the moderator's privilege and ask the first question. So I'm on the board of the SETI Institute, and one of the things we grapple with a lot is if we do get a message, let's say a radio message or some other evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, do we reply? But even more, I think, significant than that is how do we decide as a species whether we reply? And my question to you is based on your study of and discussions with religions, what suggestions do you have for how we can involve people and leaders of many different faiths in making that decision? If a message comes to Earth, do we respond? To what degree should we be sure that all these different faiths are part of how we come to an answer?
It's a very interesting question because if you gathered spiritual leaders from 10 different religious domains, they're not going to agree on what that answer should be. Some of them will be genuinely afraid of the communication you received and letting others know that we exist. Some will be happy, right? They expect those to exist, and this confirms fundamental beliefs in their scripture. So they'd be absolutely thrilled. Let them know we're here. We already knew they were there. We've just now finally found out what we already know. But there are certainly some religious domains that will be threatened. Not very many, but there will be many people, billions of people perhaps within one of those religious domains, which will feel threatened because their religion would feel threatened. Now, I would say that let's take the Roman Catholic Church as a good example, because they've been producing, robust philosophy for 2,000 years. And Roman Catholic philosophers have been very adept across 2,000 years at adapting to change when necessary. If we detected a message from other species, even those in the Roman Catholic Church who deny the existence of extraterrestrial life, given enough time, I think, would figure out how to embrace it and accept it and find it completely consistent with Roman Catholicism. As we've seen, we currently have Roman Catholic scholars who say life doesn't exist anywhere else, and some who say life does exist everywhere else. And of the second group, some who say Christianity applies to the whole universe, and some who say Christianity doesn't. Well, the actual collection of a message from beyond the earth, not the spiritual beyond, okay, would force them into one place and select one answer. So I think most religious spiritual leaders would quickly embrace the reality that we're not alone, and would probably say that we ought to talk to them. Now, of course, that conversation will be very slow, as you know, but we probably ought to talk to them. What I find most interesting about your question is that we're normally thinking in terms of our political leaders for whether we send out the answer, right? But I think it would be at least as important to consult with the spiritual leaders.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so let me now formally introduce Dr. Jeff Matthews, who's the Professor of Astronomy at Foothill College, and I'm going to turn over the question and answer period to him.
Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. And I'd like to thank you, Dr. Weintraub, for coming out and speaking with us this evening. So there have been a flurry of emails, and I've been trying to kind of, categorize them and as we're coming in. So I'm trying to get an order to these here. And so I've got a question from Greg asking, while we await official confirmation of exobiology of any kind, this audience member was wondering what you think about the popular assertions that UFO sightings have already answered that question, right? There are people out there who think, yeah, we've already met the aliens. And I'll add my little bit onto this, right? Which is, yeah, to say, couldn't we kind of use that population almost to kind of make a measurement of how people will react? If there are people who already think that aliens are visiting us, would it be possible to look at their religious beliefs and how they've shifted based on this other belief?
It's an interesting question. I think there is a significant portion of the human population that does think extraterrestrials exist, and they have seen UFOs. The evidence for that, I think, is scant to nil. And I don't think there are any truly unidentified flying objects that are evidence of extraterrestrials. But that's just my opinion, because I don't know. Right? But all the scientific evidence seems to be against UFOs being real evidence of extraterrestrials, but not every sighting has been studied.
Oh, but I think that the point that they were getting at, and definitely that I'm getting at, is there are people who believe that in those things, right? And so whether or not there's any actual evidence for aliens visiting us, right? There's a non-trivial number of people who are convinced that they are. And so, the possibilities of basically using them to answer the question, how will the discovery of life affect human religions? Because for that fraction of people, they think it has happened.
I think I see where you're going with this. What I've found in talking to people, and I've spoken at a number of churches and community groups and other audiences about this, is that there are plenty of people who believe that life exists beyond the earth, that there are aliens. And I don't even need all the fingers on one hand to count the number of people who've thought hard about what that means for them religiously. Okay? It never has occurred to them that the existence of aliens may or may not be consistent with their religious beliefs. So if we're trying to figure out whether to respond to the aliens, first, all those people need to start thinking about what they think it means for life to exist beyond the earth. It's one thing to simply say, I believe they're out there, but I actually think it's incumbent on us to put that in context of our own worldviews. What does it mean? What will that mean? And I think the answers are not simple, as religious scholars have shown over the last 2,000 years, because religious scholars all over the map have trouble wrestling with this.
Got it. And so then there were a few questions relating to the idea that aliens are already part of our religions, and so put kind of succinctly by one of our audience members, that there are some groups that view, for example, Jesus having been an extraterrestrial being, and so what would be the impacts for those groups of discoveries?
There are lots of religions that I left out of the book. I call them 20th century UFO religions. And again, there are dozens of them, which believe extraterrestrials have been here, that they brought us the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Book of Mormon or whatever it is. Okay? There are lots of those believers. I shied away from digging deeply into those beliefs, mostly because they were very small groups. Okay. And the book had a finite number of pages and I just stopped. But there are certainly lots of people who do believe that aliens have been here. Some of those aliens they believe in came here in religious guise, right? Maybe Jesus was an alien. Maybe Muhammad was an alien. Okay? And some of those simply believe aliens came and helped us build the pyramids. I don't think there's any convincing evidence for any of that, but religion is about belief. If someone wants to believe that, they're going to believe it. And I'm not going to bully them into telling them they can't believe it, okay? Provided their religion and their religious beliefs don't impinge on my personal space and my beliefs, they're welcome to believe those things. But there's certainly no scientific evidence for those aliens having been here.
So, okay, thank you. And so then thinking, there were several people who wrote in kind of asking questions that were kind of about the discovery ladder, right? So here's one from Michael asking, it is possible that biosignatures will be found before technosignatures. And so, and in particular with some religions or some groups rejecting the idea of evolution, how would they be responding, even just not even necessarily to intelligent life, but just to life?
For those who don't accept evolution, that was the premise of the question, right? For those who don't accept evolution, they could accept the possibility of amoebas on another world and not be afraid that those amoebas would evolve into intelligent life. And so God doesn't need to pay any attention to them because there will never be intelligent life elsewhere. Microscopic life, unintelligent life would not directly be a problem for someone who opposes evolution. Okay? And they can still believe that life on Earth did not arise through the process of evolution. God just created us as we are. Okay? But the existence of tiny little critters on other worlds, I would think ought to scare them into thinking that maybe they're wrong about evolution. Okay? because it is possible that if we found some of those little guys, once we keep searching and keep listening, we may find some more advanced creatures. So I think the discovery of even a biosignature is an existential threat to the concept that evolution doesn't happen.
Got it. And so then, and it's kind of almost a case of, you mentioned earlier that, religions have historically adapted with new discoveries, right? And so, but then of course, if they don't, then, it then becomes, like you said, an existential threat to them, right? Because then it's like, how do you convince people to join in if you're saying something that everybody just really knows is not the case?
Think the creationist viewpoint is perhaps the most threatened viewpoint, religious viewpoint, by the discovery of extraterrestrial life. And certainly, if it were a techno-signature that was discovered rather than a biosignature, that would be a huge problem. Now, God could have created other beings without evolution, but now God has to focus on two worlds or many other worlds, not a threat to the belief of many creationists that we are the sole focus of God's attention.
Okay, great. And so now, we're getting down to the last few questions here. And so we got a question from Millie, which is kind of hitting on a point that was starting to come up a little bit with your conversation with Andrew a few minutes ago. Looking at this mix of politics with religion, and so kind of asking, when you add politics into the mix, how is that going to change how groups are reacting to the discovery of non-human intelligences, whether around other stars or otherwise? And like those overlaps between politics and religion.
I'd be happy staying away from that overlap between politics and religion, but it's there. Most, no, I shouldn't say most, many countries in the world, their politics are dominated by religion. There's no separation between the two. Okay? Many people in many countries where that's not the case would like that to be the case. So I think politics can't help but get involved in this. How that happens, I don't know. But I think politicians will be the first ones to respond or to try to dictate any response that we would have, because they're the ones in control. But a lot of those politicians who are in control are religious in their beliefs. I'm not sure I answered the question.
Yeah, it's probably a tough one to even try to wrap our heads around, right? It's just too complicated. It's one I shy away from myself, right? It's just so complicated.
We're certainly living through an era that may or may not end anytime soon, in which we dispute facts. And anybody is free at the moment through social media to dispute what you or I or other scientists would put forward as a fact. So even the claim by the SETI Institute that they detected a technological message from afar, or an announcement by NASA or ESA or some scientists associated with some telescope that they had discovered a clear biosignature on another world. Now, lots of people, including politicians, could simply deny that fact. They're wrong. They've misinterpreted their data. It's just, they've made it up. That's part of the world we're living in right now. So people can choose at the moment their own scientific facts, which I find quite bothersome, but they're able to do so. And a lot of people who would hear about the discovery of a biosignature or a technosignature will simply deny that ever happened. And they can stick their head back in the sand and do whatever they were doing before and not worry about it. And of course, any techno-signatures are going to come from worlds which are far enough away that nobody living on Earth is ever going to actually see a Klingon, right? Okay, we may start a slow communication thread with them, but that's going to be across many, many human lifetimes. So it'll be very easy for any individual human or any individual social group to just ignore what's going on.
Yeah, the overwhelmingly just the fact that space is big. So I think we'll wrap up with this final question here. Um, so what implications for traditional religious beliefs can be drawn just from our current cosmological picture? So not even going to the point of, discoveries of life or intelligent life elsewhere. Is there current knowledge that is already, what tensions are already coming about because of current knowledge? So, for example, we know that Earth is a latecomer to the universe, and we now clearly know that it's just one of many oodles of planets.
I think now we're going back 50 years to the bottle of wine around the campfire, where we can speculate in any way we want. And I think there are two ways to go with this. There always have been. One is the laws of physics should be the same everywhere in the universe. The content of the universe should be the same everywhere in the universe. With our telescopes, we look in every direction, and the universe looks the same in every direction. These principles of universality suggest that whatever's happening in our part of the universe is possible in any other part of the universe. Go anywhere in the universe, you'll have hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, zinc, all the things you need for life. You will have planets with atmospheres, orbiting suns, at temperatures that are like the Earth. Life could exist there. There's no doubt. And this is, I'll call it the Carl Sagan point of view, in which there are, living beings everywhere. But it's just as easy to argue the opposite, which is we've seen no evidence of it, right? The Fermi paradox that some listeners will know about, in which ignoring the UFOs, okay, which I'm happy to do, we've seen no evidence that any other creatures or intelligent life forms exist in the universe, and we've looked hard. Okay, we've looked in a lot of places; they haven't been here, and given that the Earth has been here for 4.5 billion years, and that intelligent life in the form of us has been here for a few tens of thousands of years, and we developed technology in the form of farming just a few thousand years ago, and radio 150 years ago, and rockets 50 years ago, and we're just beginning to communicate with the rest of the universe. And if you extrapolate that forward, how rapidly rocketry propulsion is moving forward, within a few thousand or tens of thousands of years, we will leave the Earth. We will start colonizing the Milky Way galaxy. First, there will be 2 Earths, and then 4 Earths, and then 8 and 16 and 32 Earths. And within a million years, maybe a few million years, humans will have colonized the entire Milky Way galaxy. And if there's any other intelligent life anywhere in the Milky Way galaxy that's had a head start on us of even a little bit, a few million years, they should have done it too. And we don't see that. So they don't exist. That's the counter, right? And as I said, we're back talking around a campfire where we know absolutely nothing, okay? And you can come up with a reasonable conclusion that we're alone in the universe and we have evidence to prove it, or there's no way we can possibly be alone in the universe because the laws of physics demand that life is going to exist somewhere. I think what's spectacular is that we're at a turning point now where we're not speculating anymore. We're actually doing the science to find out what the answer is. And I hope in my lifetime, we learn something. But certainly in the lifetimes of many of the listeners and watchers, we're going to learn something. We will either find or not find biosignatures. The SETI Institute will say, we give up, or we found something. Stay posted.
What a wonderful place to conclude. Let me say thank you from all of us for what was certainly one of the most thought-provoking discussions in our 25 years of the Silicon Valley Astronomy Lectures. Thank you, Dr. Weintraub.
Thanks for having me.
Let me mention for everyone that we will continue the lectures this year. And our next program will be November 13th, when we will have a speaker about the James Webb Space Telescope and its research on the very first galaxies, the earliest galaxies in the history of the universe. So please join us again on Wednesday, November 13th. And thank you all for being part of the Silicon Valley Astronomy Lectures.